Hello and welcome, Exiles. Today I want to break down everything you need to know for Mercenaries and the Luminary, whether or not you want to play it as a build where the Mercenary is supporting you, or as a Merc bot where you are supporting the Mercenary and you want the best one with the best clear or the best damage. Now let's start off first with using the Mercenary to support your character. I think a lot of people are sleeping on how strong this Ascendancy is, and I want to try to remind you how powerful these can be as a character player basically power multiplier. Now, I've wrote down a few things, a few examples for ways they can give you buffs as well as ways or options rather to choose for your specific build and what builds can be very well supported from this. Now, to start things off with, there's obvious things like, for example, giving them a Perkle's Toe. For lightning builds, this is literally 30% more damage, and this is one singular unique item. For your ascendancy point, if you're grabbing two unique items, Perkle's Toe is a really good option. Another thing you could do is something like Mask of the Tribunal. I did this in Mercenary League, where you can give the Mercenary a bunch of attribute gear. With really min-max gear, you can potentially give the Mercenary up to like 1,000 of two attributes roughly if you're giving them a bunch of rare gear, which would mean this helmet, Mask of Tribunal, would be giving nearby allies, you the player, up to 80 crit multi and 40 cast speed. This can also be volatile valved, so this helmet can go up to 10 crit multi and 5 cast speed. So these are two of the best items. Just some examples of uniques. There's other uniques that work really well, like Kingmaker, for example. If you're playing an Eruptor with the Flame Link bot, you can give him the Kingmaker and he'll give you 50 crit multi, 10 fortify, and coal. There's some pretty huge multipliers to character power from unique items. But not only that, you can get a lot of character power from the rares they are wearing. For example, a Malediction helmet, the Glimpse of Chaos, you can corrupt that to be a rare helmet, and then you don't have to spend a point on it. Malediction makes nearby enemies take 10% increased damage, and reduces the nearby enemy's damage by 10% as well. So it's pretty nice power multiplier there. You can get aura effect through a number of means, corruption on amulet, the mods on weapons, like for example, wands can roll zealotry or wrath aura effect. You can get mods on influence shields, like Redeemer gives non-curse aura effect, I think up to 10 or 15%, I can't remember exactly. Eldritch Implicits can roll non-curse aura effect or a specific aura effect that can roll higher. Annoyance, synth implicits on helmet, like for example, if you got a Mask of Tribunal with aura effect, or you could even corrupt it to rare. That is ways you can still get aura effect through those items. You can also get additional curses on these mercs, like for example, the body armor delve mod. You can get it from the hunter mod on body armor. You can anoint it. You can corrupt it on amulet. And then with this extra curse, you can give them a curse on hit corrupted rare pair of gloves, or you can make a ring with a curse on hit. These are ways you can add extra minus res or extra increased damage, or even like enfeeble, stuff like that. You can add on the merc for extra character power to yourself. Not only that, you can also get Scorch, Sap, or Brittle via boot implicits as well as shield. The high spaces, if they have, you give them like a high block shield, they will be proccing these for you, which are pretty nice ailments that you might not have access to depending on what your character is. You can also scale Warcry buff effect. There's some of these mercs which have very strong Warcry buffs. You can get Eldritch Implicits on boots. You can get Eldritch Implicits on body armor. You can anoint Warcry buff effect. Anoints do work with the mercenaries. And then there's things like, just like a defensive item example, Calm's Binding. If you don't have a lot of fizz mitigation, putting a Calm's Binding on a merc is quite nice to make the enemies deal a lot less fizz to your character. So these are all just some examples of ways you can make the mercs give you more damage via their items or a bit more defense. And that right there is already a boatload of power, but it doesn't stop there because some mercs have some extremely good double buff skills. And I'm going to point out a few of them. Fallen Reverend, for example, can get any two of these three: Wrath, Zealotry, or Battle Mage's Cry. Battle Mage's Cry is like 2 to 3 base crit, if I remember correctly, so it's nice if you need to fix your crit. And then Wrath and Zealotry can double up if you're playing, for example, a Lightning spell build. And with these items up here, these aura effect scaling, you can actually get a very high effect Zealotry and Wrath, which is just a huge damage multiplier on your character. I want to stress here that these auras are also higher level auras. I think they're baseline around, they're somewhere in the 26 to 28 range if you have a level 83 mercenary. It's been a hot minute since I played Mercenary League, but I do remember their auras being a much higher level. And so Fallen Reverend could have some very good double auras for a caster. Another good example is, let's say you want a build that doesn't have a good amount of flat and you want some armor. The Eruptor can get Flame Link, which is very high flat fire damage, and Determine Aura. This works great if you want to play like a one-hand build with a lot of fast attacks, like a wanding character, anything where you're not having a great way to get flat. This works fantastically. Next up, I have Sniper. This is one of the double mercs that can work well with an evasion build because it has Grace Haste. A couple of these mercs in this list have Grace plus another aura, which I think I had one over here, which I maybe accidentally deleted on accident, which is a Blade Biter. Also has a Grace plus Malevolence combo. If you're playing an evasion build, that is a dot build. Some of these times when you're playing builds, your aura's space is pretty tight, and being able to get yourself Flesh and Stone, Tempest Shield, Arctic Armor, a lot of these other defensive benefits in without having to sacrifice a 50% reservation slot is pretty nice from these double aura Merc bots or mercenaries. Another option is Many Shot. If you're playing a Fizz build that wants Grace, you get good gain Fizz and you get evasion scaling. And keep in mind, these are just the double auras, but you can also benefit from a lot of these rare items and unique items you put on the mercenary themselves. And then last, but certainly not least, one of the most OP support bots from the mercenaries is the Swiftblade. This, if you remember, made Facebreakers a very legitimately strong build because this guy, not only could he get Rallying Cry, this doesn't actually count as one of their aura slots, he could also get Pride, and he could even get Insight. So he could give you Frenzies, he could have a high effect Pride, and he could give you a boatload of Flat Fizz because you give him a really nice high damage axe. He does Rallying Cry with some buff effect and gives you a bunch of Flat Fizz, which is just insane if you want to play Facebreakers. It was the first time I saw Facebreakers be crazy legitimately strong in I don't know how many years, and I would imagine probably maybe back. Now, take all this information with a grain of salt because they very easily could have changed some of the skills that mercenaries have. So until we get the league live, we can't necessarily confirm these. I think the mercenaries are going to be largely have a lot of the same skills, and that's going to be how it is. But for all we know, they could have changed certain things. For example, they could say, well, we don't want Facebreakers to be good ever, so we're going to delete Rallying Cry. That all is up to the devs if they decide to do that for balance reasons prior, but I'm just giving you some of the standout examples. Now, let's talk a little bit about mercenaries in a more general sense. How do these mercenaries work? How do they pick their skills? And if you're going to pick a mercenary for yourself to be supporting you, the character, this is very important. Number one is they have their primary skills. These are the skills they always roll with. You can't get around with it. You can't get around it. And sometimes these skills can be very non-ideal if you want to support them as a mercenary dealing damage for you. Now, the first thing I want to point out is this key idea of movement skills kind of brick the AI on mercenaries. You'll notice here, for example, Earthshaker, Eruptor, they both have a leap slam, which ends up meaning they leap slam a lot and they waste time when they could be attacking. Generally, if you're trying to hire a mercenary to support you, the player, you want to avoid movement skills at all costs. So the mercenaries that have movement skills in their primary set is usually not too good. I will say some movement skills seem like they bug out or the mercenaries don't use them very often, and that ends up being okay. But for the most part, generally, as a general rule of thumb, avoid movement skills on mercenaries. Next thing you're going to notice is their secondary skills. These are the skills that are usually going to be your bread and butter for your primary damage skills. These are the skills that are just they kind of make or break the mercenary. For example, one of the best mercenaries in the game is the Kineticist, but Kineticist doesn't always spawn with KB of Clustering. A lot of these other skills are just much worse than KB of Clustering, or they might conflict with the ability for the mercenary to use the correct skill. For example, Kinetic Bolt is a lot worse than KB of Clustering, and if this mercenary spawns with two skills and it rolls Kinetic Bolt and Kinetic Bolt Blast of Clustering, it will then sometimes use the skill that's bad, sometimes use the skill that's good, which is inefficient. You would rather have them have skills that they either A, don't use very often, or B, have some sort of cooldown attached to them. Like a Greater KB, I believe, has some sort of cooldown attached to them, or the Merc just doesn't use it very often. Now, I've personally gone through and highlighted in my guide some of the best Mercs and some of their use cases and where they're good at. For example, Kineticist, best in slot clear Merc, has some pretty good damage, but it's not the best damage Merc. Whereas something like a Blade Ambusher is a very good bossing single target, but kind of falls off completely in maps. Something you could use if you wanted to do early boss rushing. Whereas, again, if you go a little bit further and let's say you're min-maxing a character, Armor stacking with the Merc is actually extremely strong, and Blade Biter and Smolder Strike both have Molten Strike abilities and can use swords and work very well for single target Mercs, for example. And I also went over and got some guidelines for some initial gear sets you could work with, or ideal gear sets you could work with if you're going for some of these Mercs, keeping in mind with the limitations of only being able to either choose like 2 uniques if you really want to go for Flame Link scaling with the light radius node, or later on, maybe you can justify giving up the light radius node to get some more powerful unique multipliers for like the armor scaling setup. I also highlighted here for if you're doing a Merc bot in campaign, you really want to prioritize giving the mercenary flat damage through bench crafts or percent elemental damage with attacks. So you'll notice on all these gear slots, I'm just trying to showcase, hey, craft flat lightning or craft elemental damage with attacks. The glove slots that you can do that give the mercenary flat damage are amulets, rings, weapons, and gloves, and increased damage from belt. And the other gear slots, you really just kind of want to make sure they have life, they have res, to keep them alive. So that's more generic things about the Merc. Now, going back again, when it comes to utility, they can always choose 2 of the utilities. And this is where movement skills can appear again. You want to avoid those, and you'd rather want to search for the ideal D term, or like the ores that give passive benefits. So this one has D term, and maybe it has Impenetrable Beacon, and now that Bastion. Now this thing is one that Jung used, where he scaled a bunch of duration for how long he would last on his character. Actually got it up to 100% uptime, and was one of the few instances I've seen where drowning doesn't auto kill your character, which was very cool. GGG immediately patched this, but you get the idea. You want to go for the passive benefits from the utility skills. Now I'm cutting this because I forgot to have it pulled up, which is the Mercenary Warrant. Now you're going to notice some key things here. Number 1, in the Mercenary Warrant, it just shows you the skills. It doesn't show you the support links. However, if you look at the grayed out text, it says right-click this item to view mercenary details, which I imagine would allow you to check the mercenaries' support gems before purchasing from the buy window from Faustus if you're buying a mercenary from somebody else. And this is very important. The support gems can make or break a mercenary. For example, you could roll Brutality on a support gem for a mercenary that you want to deal elemental damage, and this will outright just make the mercenary not deal damage. You want to be very careful to avoid brick supports, and then on top of that, you want to look for ideal supports. For example, on KB of Clustering, you want things like multi-proj, you want things like returning proj, you want a clear support. There are supports that are quite beneficial, and it's pretty ideal to look for those. So I don't know if we're going to be able to search on the trade site based on specific support gems appearing. I would imagine we're going to be able to search based on the skills at the very least. So, for example, if you're looking for a mercenary which has Zealotry plus Wrath and a nice double aura, you could search based on that, and that's just can pull you straight to the Merc you want to buy to support your character. Or you can search, for example, a Kineticist that doesn't have Kinetic Bolt, but it does have Kinetic Blast of Clustering, and you can find a mercenary that has a lot of the ideal skills already ready to go. Maybe if the trade search dev is really, really gracious to us, he will somehow figure out a way to let us search for support gems on the mercenary as well, because that would be very nice to cancel out having to skip through mercenaries that have things like Brutality, things like incorrect support gems, or just not support gems that are good, for example. We'll see how this works out, but at the very least, I think we'll be able to search on skills and the specific mercenary type. Maybe we'll be able to search support gems. I don't know. But you can see I wrote down some ideal skills for these various mercs along with some support gems to use with them. Now, important here, I want to note something that I've showcased. Obviously, the PoE wiki page breaks down what skills can be secondary, what skills can be utility, what skills are primary, a lot of stuff like that. But more importantly, the Mercenaries PoeDB page allows you to hover specific skills and see some of their stat lines. Now, this thing, obviously, when you're hovering Grace, just shows you the 1 to 20 gem. Mercenaries get a higher level aura, so keep that in mind. But aside from that, there's skills that aren't normally in the base game that these mercenaries have that are actually kind of interesting, and it's good to know what they do. For example, Truth and Agility is a nice 10% action speed bonus for you and the mercenary. And they have a lot of, like, some of these mercenaries have some weird skills like this, or they have occasionally different versions of the same skill we're used to. For example, the Cruel Mistress has a Soul Rend, which deals a ridiculous amount of flat damage compared to the Soul Rend of Reaping we might be used to as the player. And this enters the third important note I want to make here, which is mercenaries can be dangerous. And I want to just point out a few mercenaries that can just completely destroy characters. Cruel Mistress is one of them. If you ever watch the Gauntlet highlights, I think almost half of all the mercenary rip clips was to this mercenary right here, because this Soul Rend just hits like an absolute truck, and it's unexpected compared to some other mercenaries which don't really hit you that hard. I want to specifically note that spellcaster mercs, from my experience when fighting mercenaries, can be some of the most dangerous because they have just some ridiculously high base damage numbers. Soul Rend of Reaping being one of them. Another one of them that I would also recommend avoiding or being a bit cautious when you go to fight is the Sanguimancer. A lot of builds don't have a lot of great defense against physical dots, which the only way to mitigate that is pretty much having a ton of PDR. And like, you might be a physically tanky character because you have a lot of armor, but the physical damage over time doesn't care about that. And Sanguimancer can erase you very quickly. Some other highlight examples of mercs that I personally found dangerous when playing the game was, for example, I believe it was the Storming Zealot with Divine Ire. Some of these skills the mercs have, some are much more dangerous than others. So if you're playing hardcore, or if you're about to fight a merc that has a very valuable loot table, you want to be a bit careful and kind of know some of these mercenaries. Those are some of the obvious ones that just come to mind as I'm thinking about it. Um, I think there are some other dangerous ones that I'm not thinking about at this time, but in general, I'd say some of the spellcaster mercs can be pretty rippy. The attack-based mercs can be more dangerous, but really, if they spawn with a randomly generated weapon, a lot of times that weapon can be complete garbage. And even if they would be dangerous with a good weapon, they're holding a bad one and they just hit like a wet noodle, and they're not very dangerous. So yeah, that's what I wanted to highlight. Mercenaries should have some options to be tradable and searchable based on good aura benefits. And even if you're not planning to play a mercenary build yourself, I would strongly encourage you to keep in mind that some of these double auras are very valuable to builds that want to use them, and you'd have the ability to sell them for quite a lot. For example, Wrath Zealotry, for a lot of lightning casters that are going to be playing this league, this is one of their ideal mercenary supports they would want to go for, and maybe you can get a pretty penny if you know some of the better mercs to look out for. Or for example, you look through this page here that I wrote, I'm going over some of the more ideal attack mercs and some of the abilities you'd want them to have. So just keep that in mind. A lot of warrants can actually be worth something to the players playing those builds, because a lot of us don't want to search forever in maps to find it ourselves. We're going to want to buy them. I myself, when I was farming a specific double aura, I wanted a Purity of Ice plus Discipline Frost Hand. And in Mercenary League, I did over 500 Abomination maps to find that one double combination of auras on a Frost Hand. It was kind of miserable, and I would have definitely been willing to play quite a pretty penny, and I'm sure a lot of other players would feel that way if they're trying to search for an ideal mercenary with either the utility buffs they want or the skills they want for either playing a mercenary or a luminary as a main build where the luminary supports you, or the vice versa where you're playing a luminary to support the merc and make it do all the damage. So yeah, that should be kind of a nice crash course on all the different elements of mercenaries and some of the highlights. Obviously, GGG has the ability to have rearranged their skills, rearrange their balancing, and until we get in there and play it on the start of all Curse of All Flame, we're not really going to know. From the way they've talked about it, it doesn't sound like they've changed them all that much for the baseline permanent mercs. It sounds like they made a separate class of mercenary, the temporary ones, which are at baseline a lot more strong because you can't swap their gear around. But the permanent ones seem to be in a similar place based on the way Andrew was talking about it in the Q&A. We'll see how that is on League Start, obviously, but that's why I made this video, kind of going over the breakdown of the various things you can do for the mercenary. And I, of course, am going to keep working on theory crafting the best way I think to start the character. Right now, I'm working on trying to figure out how I want to start a league start a Scion for the least amount of feels bad to properly transition to a Luminary Merc bot when we get our first lab. So yeah, that's all you need to know about mercenaries. As always, thanks for watching, Exiles. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.